Friends, good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to this important meeting where we are going to analyze the direct tax proposals of the Union Budget 2021, for which we have our beloved speaker, CA Vaidyan, past president of ICAI. They're fortunate enough to get his dates when we try to reach him. And this budget has been an unprecedented budget for various reasons. And when it comes to announcements of the direct taxes, there have been a lot of things hidden in fine print. So we will wait for our beloved speaker to address us and some of those nitty-gritties or things which are there in the budget, which a member should be careful both in his practice and as well as to advise his clients how to take care of things. So before I request the speaker to address, I'll request Secretary SARC, Dr. C. Abhishek Murli, to formally introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Chairman. A very warm good afternoon and good evening to all the participants who are joined
Abhishek,
in today.
Over to you.
Dynamic Chairman SARC.
You can introduce the speaker.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, sir. There is some delay in Chairman. That's
okay, fine. So, very good afternoon to all. Chairman of SARC, CA Dungarchand Jain, our dynamic past president, CA Vaid Jain sir, and all the participants who are joined in today. Today's session is a very important session. Traditionally, we have our budget meeting on first or the day of the budget, followed by a detailed or a clause-by-clause analysis where we try to get the creme de la creme. And I think we are very, very fortunate to have got the time of our past president, CA Vaid Jain sir, who's brilliant, both as a leader and as an academician and as a person who will interpret the law. I'm sure you would have all read all of his very, very in-depth analysis. Whenever anything comes regarding direct taxes, you would have surely read all of his updates. And to have him with us at SARC to address our members is a matter of privilege. As the chairman very rightly said, in fact, I remember after our Honorable Finance Minister presented the budget, I had to go on live and TV when the anchor asked, what is there for individuals? I did not have much to say. I said, it's not one for individuals. And said, what about business people? When it came to business people also, I did not have much to say. The thing is, as the chairman very rightly said, there's a lot of amendments. It's a very heavy budget. It's a very technical budget. A lot of details have been couched in the finance bill and in the memorandum. And I think Vaid Jain sir is the best person to take us through the same. So now I have the privilege of introducing CA Vaid Jain, our past president. He is from Delhi and he is a man of prudence, veracity, and intelligence since birth. He's academically brilliant. He's a rank holder both in his CA Inter and Final. He's a triple bachelor degree holder. He completed his Bachelor of Science from Punjab University, and after that he did his CA course. Then for the love of his subject, he did his Bachelor in Arts in Economics, and then he also completed his Bachelor in Law. So he's a true believer in continuing professional education. His expertise is therefore not limited to one, but 4 subjects. He is a fellow member of the ICAI for more than 3 decades and was elected to the Central Council in 2004 and 2007. And in February 2007, he was elected to the Council as Vice President and further elevated to a President in February 2008. And during his term as President, he and ICAI earned various credentials which embarked on a new area of professional development. His integrity, zeal, and commitment to the profession and society has been recognized and appreciated by the Government of India. When the Satyam scandal broke out in 2008, it happened during his tenure as the President of ICAI. He was instrumental in handling the biggest ever fraud in the corporate sector of India and the revival of Satyam and the 2 associated companies. And he was in fact part of the board, and he took over ensuring the continuance of the business, saving jobs of thousands of employees and several crores, thousands of crores of banks, and who had lent money and execution of infrastructure products of national importance, and more than 900 families which had invested in their lifelong savings in these companies. He is regularly involved in the consultation process of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and member of various expert committees and panels constituted by the Government of India for fiscal and commercial legislations. In the corporate forum also, he is very active. He's a founder board member of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, set up by the MCA, member of the IFAC during 2008 to 2011, and has more than 4 decades of experience in advising corporates on finance and taxation matters. In fact, I must add, he specializes in direct taxes, and he's handled some of the most complex and complicated tax matters and appeals of various corporates in the history of India. He's also a prolific writer, having command in Hindi, English, French, Urdu, and Punjabi, and he's authored many books on direct taxes and regularly contributes articles to various journals, newspapers, and frequently participates in TV debates, programs on economic, finance, and tax issue. He is a member and independent director on the board of DLF Limited, Inventia Healthcare Limited, and also chairman of the MCX Clearing Corporation Limited. I must say this is only a very brief profile about our very illustrious past president. He's a very close friend. I have seen him. In fact, when he was president was when I entered as a CA student, and my father was on the council with Ved Jain sir for a very long time. In fact, I used to remember him because whenever my father met Ved Jain sir, he used to come back home with Bengali market sweets, this Gajak sweet he used to come back with. So I have very fond and sweet memories of Ved Jain sir. He's truly a great leader and a great analyst, and he is a true inspiration for young members and I think our senior members as well. Thank you so much, Ved Jain sir, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. We're looking forward to your insights to presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Abhishek, for such an elaborate introduction and for your kind words. I have a very pleasant surprise. I could see as a secretary, SIRC, a son of my dear friend, Mr. B. Murli. I could see at Bihar. I had a very fond memory of a visit to your house. And thanks to Mr. Chairman of the SIRC, Mr. DC Jain, for your invitations. I have very pleasant memories of visiting various places in the southern India. I can still recall the SIRC conference, annual conference, which happened normally once in a year, and Chennai would happen during that year 2008. I have very pleasant memories of visiting various southern India branches, may it be Bangalore, may it be Vizag, maybe Coimbatore or various other places, maybe Cochin and other places also. I still recall, and when I received an invitation, I think 10 days back, the chairman called me up and I said, yes, it will be a player. And then he asked me the time. I said, no, I will give the earliest possible time. And he was so kind to me, any day, anytime. So that was a suggestion, leaving no option for me to not to say no. And then I said, all right, I will be there any day next. And that's a thanks, Chairman sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and my all dear friends from Southern India, professional colleagues, brothers and sisters. It's a very proud privilege, and I will say very fond memories I have of the Southern India, giving me an opportunity to talk to you and interact with you on a topic which is Budget 21-22. Now, coming to the issue of the Budget 21-22, we all know this budget is now more than 50 hours old. This budget was presented on 1st February at 11 to 1 p.m. And now I think it is the 3rd of February, and we are sitting at about 6:30 or now. And it's more than 54 hours when the budget was presented to the Parliament by the Honorable Finance Minister. And we have all heard her speaking in the Parliament. Thereafter, we have heard the various debates going on the channel, TV, electronic media, and then we have read the print media, and so many things have been said about it. One thing which you would have noticed, everyone has appreciated this budget, and everybody said, yes, it's a big budget, it's a thumbs up budget and issue. Before I come to the nitty-gritty of the various provisions of tax issue, which I believe I will just talk to about something which are very important on this budget, and we should need to understand on that point. You see that there are changes which have been proposed in the budget which give a direction to the Indian economy. It looks to be a reformist budget, giving a clear shape and direction that in which way the Indian economy and Indian government is thinking about how to move about this government. You would have noticed the finance minister said that FDI investment will be allowed to be increased in the case of insurance sector, which she has increased from 49 to 74%. That's a very big change, and even the control and management will be allowed to for an investment to have happened. She also announced that at least 2 private sector, public sector bank will be privatized. This is a big change which she has made it also. And then she said, yes, LIC will also be privatized by issue of IPO, etc. Something like this. She has talked about it. Another big change, probably whether you have noticed or not noticed, she when you was speaking is in the power sector, she said, now as a distributing company, whenever electricity is supplied, there is an exclusive monopoly of one distributor, either is a public sector or a private sector, depending upon the area which the power is being supplied. And as a purchaser and as a consumer, I have no right, but that is only supply which come to my house or my office or business. Now she said that this will not be a monopoly, and there will be more than one distributing company giving an option to the consumer to choose its supplier. This will be a big game changer for the power sector, as we have seen in the communication telephone after 1995. There used to be earlier only one private player, government player, MTNL or BSNL, and with the coming of the private player, not only the efficiency, etc., has gone up, but also the cost also has gone up. I look forward that various industry, various big player or consumer power, etc., they will be able to now negotiate a better rate and bring efficiency to Indian production, Indian costing, and so the consumer will be paying a lesser price as compared to what they are paying because of the certain inefficiency in attached to what we call basically with a distributing company when they have monopoly on that item. So I believe that will be a big changer which has been made out of issue. Now coming to the some of the issues on the budget, with number which we will be talking about it. Now everybody is happy because when the finance minister made her announcement starting from 11 o'clock to 12:30, she distributed and gave money to everyone. Everyone expectation came to what we say, yes, I wanted this, I have got it. Education, health, sanitation, financial sector, reform, debt fund, infrastructure fund, bank, NBFC, everywhere she distributed the money like anything. And what people did not get what they were expecting is very interesting. Everyone this time was mentally prepared that there will be a new taxes, there will be increase in tax, there can be a COVID tax, COVID surcharge, COVID cess, there can be what we call a increase in tax rate, there can be a state duty, there can be a wealth tax. I think that expectation has been belied, and it was a pleasant surprise to everyone. When she was speaking and the way she was talking, it looked like the way she is giving money, she is going to put a heavy tax somewhere to collect that money. But she didn't collect taxes, she didn't raise taxes, and she just said, no, I will take a hit where the fiscal deficit has gone up to 9.5%, and next year it is again proposed to be 6.8%. This is a very, very big issue gamble she has played. But I say, yes, it is good for the country. And all the apprehension there are about inflation or something interest rate going up or credit rating, I am frankly optimistic that with this government implementing and strictly monitoring the expenditure the way they have projected, if it goes in that manner quickly, it will give a quantum jump to Indian economy. That is what I expect to happen on the issue. These are the issues which I think I just said in parliamentary I need to discuss with you. Now coming to the various provision in the Income Tax Act, as we see the finance minister said that there is no change in tax rate, absolute no change. Whether I am an individual, whether an AOP or I am a HCF, whether I am a partnership firm, LLP, cooperative society, company, dividend, absolutely no change in tax rate at anywhere. Surprisingly, even the what we call special rate on dividend or other rate, there is no change. With the result, the ready reckoner which you have bought and you have been using last year will be absolutely useful this year also with no change. You can use that software because the tax calculation and computation will be exactly the same. I believe in the recent history, I have been delivering talk for I think almost more than 25 years. I believe this time in the recent history, this has happened for the first time when I'm noticing that there is absolutely no tinkering with the rate. Sometime what used to happen, some surcharge going up, some reduced, some excess going up, some reduced, some tax rate being changed, or even some special rate being changed, something like this happen. I believe this will give, I think, a stability what India need and what taxpayer want. He should be sure about of his tax liability and etc. If this becomes a convention that tax rate will not be changed unless there is a compulsion, I think this will be good for the India and for the taxpayer because it brings a stability on that part. Having said so, there is another interesting aspect if she doesn't make a change. If she doesn't make any change in the tax structure, etc., tax rate, etc., what will happen to a program like this? Your chairman, Mr. GC Jain, approached me 15 days back and he booked a program. Yes, on 3rd of February at 6:30, I will be one of the speakers. An invitation has been sent to you. What would have happened had the finance minister said on the 1st of February that this time I am making no change in tax rate and no amendment in the income tax rate? I would have no material to speak, no agenda to talk about to you. All I would have said, as we normally at cricket commentator says when he goes to the for a commentary, that let's go back to the studio because of the rain, no play is possible. I would have said the same thing since the finance minister has made no amendment. There is no change in the income tax. Let's go back and enjoy and talk about something else rather than income tax. But that can't happen. Because when finance minister is delivering her talk and making a budget announcement, she is giving job and opportunity and enough material for everyone to talk about, think about, and discuss. How can she deprive this benefit and this right to a speaker like me or people like me? Because we need agenda, something like this. And she was kind enough this time also, at least to provide 79 clauses in the finance bill to amend various provisions of the Income Tax Act, so that I can speak at least for 40-45 minutes, 1 hour and talk to you and explain these nitty-gritties. Now, since we are professional chartered accountant, we need to understand, we need to read and work it out. And that's why I'm here to talk about all these 79 clauses where the finance minister has proposed changes in the various provisions of the Income Tax Act, though none of these provisions change your tax liability as tax rate and etc. are concerned. Now, firstly, let me talk about the individuals. As an individual, as I said, no change in the tax rate, but there can be a certain change in your taxable income consequent to few of the amendments which have been proposed by the finance minister. One of the amendments which has been proposed by the finance minister is a restriction on exemption of interest in respect of contribution you have been making to the provident fund or to the what we call recognized provident fund or unit-linked insurance plan. We all know that amount contributed to the provident fund or a public provident fund or a recognized provident fund or buying a unit-linked insurance plan, etc., is eligible for exemption under Section 80C, and this exemption is up to ₹1,50,000. Now, there are people who contribute more to this provident fund, and normally, if this contribution earlier used to be 8.33% by the employer, and almost similar amount was being contributed by the employee. Now this ceiling has been raised to 12%, so maybe 12% being paid. But those employees who are getting a higher salary, say an employee who is getting a salary of 5 lakh rupees per month, they may be contributing more because their 12% will come to 60,000 rupees a month, and which will be a 7,20,000 rupees a year. They are eligible to contribute it. Now, interest on such income is exempt, not a direct exemption, but when we read section 10.11 and 10.12, it clearly says the amount received by you from the provident fund or a recognized provident fund, which we call accumulated balance and becoming due on your retirement or when you cease to, that is exempt. With the result, when you contribute, that is exempt. When that provident fund earn the income on that is exempt. When you receive, it is exempt. Now, the government has thought that this is causing an anomaly, that a person who gets a salary of 20,000 rupees per month, he contribute only 2,400 rupees and interest on that is exempt. Whereas since you are getting hefty salary and you are contributing a higher amount, interest on that higher amount is also exempt. So in order to remove this anomaly, now this finance bill has proposed that interest only to the extent of contribution of 2,50,000 rupees only will be exempt. Beyond that, it will not be exempt. With only one rider, that this clause will be applicable in respect of contribution made on or after 1st April 2021. With the result, whatever you have contributed till 31st March 2021, that will continue to be eligible for exemption in interest thereon will continue exemption. Henceforth, any contribution from 1st April 2021 will be, because the rules, the proposal says it will be computed in accordance with the method to be prescribed, But the normal method will be whatever you have contributed after 1st April 2021, the first 2,50,000 rupees, the interest thereon will continue to be exempt. Beyond that 2,50,000 what you contribute, interest thereon will be chargeable to tax. Same amendment has been proposed in respect of contribution or to the unit-linked insurance plan. Here, the restriction has been placed in respect of ULIP taken on or after from 1st February 2021. So meaning thereby, in case you have taken a ULIP, unit-linked insurance plan, you have subscribed to, before 1st February 2021, whatever is your obligation to contribute under that plan, even exceeding 2,50,000 rupees, that will be exempt or whatever it is. But beyond what you have taken a policy or a unit plan after 1st February 2021, the exemption will be restricted to contribution up to rupees 2,50,000 and not beyond thereof. This exemption is available under section 10(10)(d). And the reason for this is that when you contribute for ULIP, it comprises of two components. One component goes what you contribute to your insurance, another component goes for your investment. And those asset manager of ULIP, they invest that amount in the mutual fund or share, etc., equity, etc. So considering this fact, a very corresponding amendment has been made. Instead of charging the entire amount which you receive as an income of over and above 2,50,000 rupees, it has been considered that this will be considered to be a capital gain. So in a year, if you have contributed 4 lakh rupees, your 2,50,000 is exempt, 1,50,000 will be considered to be a capital asset. And later on maturity, if you receive again that 1,50,000 rupees, say 3 lakh or 3,50,000 rupees, then 2 lakh rupees will be considered to be a capital gain. Since this capital gain is arising in respect of equity, because that investment goes into equity, it will be eligible for tax at the concession rate of 10%. So benefit of 10% will be available, concession rate of 10%. So these are the two changes which have been made so far, the ULIP and this impediment. This will affect the individual. The third change is in regarding to the leave travel concession. We all know that as a mini budget, the finance minister and then in the month of December and November has announced that those people who could not travel and avail their LTC, where their employee relationship contract provided that they are eligible for LTC, and because of the pandemic they could not travel, they can claim this leave travel concession from their employer, and so the amount they get from the employer will be exempt subject to the condition that this amount is spent by the employee on purchases which is at least 3 times of the amount which he will receive, and this expenditure has to be done before 31st March 2021, and expenditure should be on such item where the GST rate is at least 12% or more. That is the idea basically. Now, since that was only an announcement by way of a press release, the finance bill has made an amendment, proposed an amendment in section 10, subsection 5, saying that the amount which you will receive in this manner under this scheme and will be exempt subject to 36,000 rupees per person per family member. So this is in line with the announcement which the finance minister had made earlier on this part. Other than this, there is absolutely no change so far personal or individual taxation is concerned, except one thing which I talk now about is that interest which is exempt in respect of affordable housing in 80 EEA of up to 1,50,000 rupees. If you buy a flat or a house up to a value of rupees 45 lakh rupees, then interest thereon is exempt under section 80 EEA of 1,50,000 rupees. Now that exemption was to expire on 31st March 2021 in respect of the loan availed up to 31st March 2021. Now period for that is being extended for another 1 year. So in case you avail a affordable housing loan for buying a flat of up to 55 lakh or residential apartment, interest which you will pay on thereon up to 1,50,000 rupees, you will be eligible to claim exemption while computing income. I may just clarify, though this provision is an old provision and only extension is being given, that interest on housing loan in respect of what is eligible under section 23B is allowed as a deduction only when the flat or the construction has been completed and income is chargeable to as income from house property. And in case of a self-occupied property, the deduction is restricted up to 2 lakh rupees. The interest paid during the construction period is not eligible for deduction, but that has to be aggregated, and that is to be allowed in 5 equal installments after the property has been completed and occupied. Now, this interest exemption in 80EA deduction is allowable even in the construction is not completed, because this is on a loan taken for the purpose of purchase or construction of house. So the moment you take a loan and whatever the interest you pay, up to that 1,50,000 rupees, you can claim exemption under this clause. This is the change, another issue. Another change which will be of use, much use to all professionals, is regarding the charitable trust institution. I have seen so many budgets, but each and every budget has some more amendment here or there to tinker with the provisions of the charitable trust or institution, NGOs, etc. Frankly speaking, and I am of the view that charitable trust or institution, with these type of amendment, we are making the law complex, difficult to comply with this. This time there are at least 4 amendments which are touching about the charitable trust or institution. 1 amendment is to relax certain provision, and the 3 amendments are to just tighten the provision and to just to plug some of the anomalies, as so-called anomalies, as per the proposals. One amendment which is, I think, favorable and good is to increase the threshold of exemption in respect of the charitable trust or institutions which are solely engaged in education or providing medical or hospital relief, etc. We all know there used to be a very old provision, section 1022, whereby say income of an educational institution solely engaged in the education and not for the purpose of not with the motive of profit will be exempt. And there was no threshold and complete exemption to all educational institutions in case they were solely engaged in education and not for the profit motive. Same exemption was for the hospital and medical, etc. Now that section 1022 was abolished, and in place thereof a new section 1023C was inserted, and educational institution and hospital was classified in 2 brackets. One, where the gross receipt of hospital or education institution didn't exceed 1 crore rupees, complete exemption, no obligation to comply with anything. Only thing is it should be solely engaged in education or medical, and the gross receipt should not exceed 1 crore rupees, and it should not be for a profit motive. In that case, there was a complete exemption. Beyond 1 crore rupees of receipt, one was required to get an approval from the DG exemption. And this exemption normally was being given after 3 years, etc. So now this budget has proposed, this finance bill has proposed, the threshold is being increased from 1 crore to 5 crore rupees. So all schools, hospital, etc., which have a receipt up to rupees 5 crore rupees, they will not be required to go to DG exemption for getting their approval renewed years after year after year. They will continue to operate, and all further obligations which are part of section 23CC will also not be applicable to such education institution because there is no condition there. So that's the exemption which has been provided therein on that part issue. Now, in addition, now beyond 5 crore rupees exemption will be, approval will be required on this. This is in section 1023 AD and AE. There are 2 clauses which are provided there on this issue. Now, this is a good move, I believe, and this will give a good many relief to the education institution or hospital, etc. But now, as against this, there are 3 changes which have been proposed in charitable trust institution. One change is that now, as we see, corpus when we receive a trust or institution receive, it is exempt. Under section 1023C, when a voluntary contribution is received by a charitable trust institution, where the donor has given an instruction that this will form part of the corpus, it is considered to be exempt. Similarly, under section 11(1)(d), in the case of a charitable trust or institution, in case a donor, voluntary donor, has given an instruction that it will form part of the trust corpus, the same will be exempt. But there is absolutely no condition thereafter what need to be followed. The only thing is required, you need an instruction from the donor that it is exempt. It will be formed part of the corpus. Now the act is being amended to provide that in case such voluntary contribution is received with the direction that this will form part of the corpus, then you need to keep such money invested in one of the prescribed mode which have been prescribed in section 11(5), which are bank deposit, etc. All those deposit, you can keep it there. Now you have to keep it, and this has to be a separate bank identified investment, bank identified. In case you utilize this amount for the purpose of carrying out your charitable activities, such amount shall not be considered towards computing the eligible charitable expenditure. Because for claiming exemption under section 1023C and as well as section 11(1)(a), you need to spend 85% of your current income towards charitable purposes. So if you have received voluntary contribution for that purpose, which are corpus, now that will not be considered to be a part of the application towards charitable purposes. Now this will put an obligation that need to identify and keep the amount separate. However, a relaxation has been given in case you use this amount, but later on this amount is recouped against future income. In the year in which you recoup such income, then that will be considered to be as an application to charitable purposes. So I can just explain you by taking an example. If you have got 1 crore rupees as a corpus, and then out of the 1 crore and current income you buy a land, your application will be only to the extent of the current income, not of this 1 crore. But later on, out of the future income, you recoup that amount of corpus, then that will also be considered to be application. Same will happen to the loan which has been taken by a charitable trust institution. When you take a loan and you apply for charitable purposes, it will not be considered to be an application for charitable purposes. However, when you will repay the loan, because loan has to be repaid, along with the interest, whenever as and when you make the payment, then that will be considered to be as an application for charitable purposes. These are the two changes which have been made. The third change which has been made for the charitable trust is, now as of date, in case there is a possibility that in 1 year, say in 2021, your expenditure toward charitable purpose is 10 lakh, but your receipts in that year is 7 lakh, meaning thereby that your excess of expenditure over income is 3 lakh rupees. And in next year, 21-22, your expenditure is 4 lakh and your receipts are say 6 lakh or 7 lakh. Now, normally what we used to do is that 3 lakh excess expenditure of earlier year, we were setting it off against the future income so as to comply with the condition of 85% section 11(1)(a) or 1023C. Now, the finance bill has proposed an amendment that this will not be allowed to be carried forward. Each year will be considered to be independent year, separate year. In case in 1 year the expenditure has exceeded the income, that expenditure will not be allowed to be carried forward. I am frankly of the view that this is not a good initiative, because there is a possibility that some of the NGO, etc., carrying out activity in the month of March, say on 27, 28, 29, organized function, you incur the expenditure because the program has been organized, but their contribution continues to be received after that month. So there was no need to delink mainly on the basis of the cutoff date of the year. When the Act permit today, even under section 11(2), that in case you receive an income in advance and you incur expenditure earlier year, by making an application, you can set off that income in subsequent year. So similarly, in case I have incurred an expenditure where contribution has to be received in subsequent year, and option has to be given to that charitable trust or institution that they can make an application that the contribution expenditure incurred in this year will be met from the income which is to be received in the subsequent year. Because otherwise it will put, I believe, a difficult proposition, because we all know charitable trust institution, the way it works and function, etc. And they have to roam around, go around, ask people to contribute, and sometimes the contribution come late, etc. So that is why the reason I believe this I think need a reconsideration, giving an option to carry forward or to allow an option that you can claim the expenditure in the subsequent year. Friends, here I may say charitable trust institutions have to play a very big role and are playing a very big role in India's, I think, the society, because government help and government whatever aid takes its own time. It is a charitable trust or institution which move very fast, quickly, and provide the necessary relief to the society. Whether it is earthquake in Bhuj or tsunami in Chennai, or whether COVID, it was NGO, etc., which have been providing services to the society and substituting and I think complementing the government in providing the relief to the society. If that be so, I believe they should be dealt with, I think, with a soft hand. all these NGOs are being taken care of by retired people, old people, and honorary people, which spare their valuable time. They don't have wherewithal, they don't have the money to meet that, to get that type of professional help, which now the law expect them to have. Now, the way the laws have been drafted, particularly the Income Tax Act, they are so complex, even we professionals find it difficult to advise and comply with these provisions. Now, to expect NGOs to comply with these provisions is a very, very difficult provision. So I am still, frankly, of the view that these should be dealt with softly, and I believe all options and issues should be dealt keeping in mind that these NGOs are also playing a very important part. Because we must agree, when all that income tax gives an exemption, that if you contribute 100 rupees, then 30 rupee tax is saved. But we must not ignore that money which goes out is 100 rupees and concession is 30 rupees. So 70 rupees is also being spent for the cause of the society. So that feature and that, I think, point should be taken care when we deal with a charitable trust or institution. So these are the changes regarding the charitable trust or institution. Coming to the sum, there is no change so far. Income from a house property is concerned, absolutely no change. Now coming to the business income, I think there are three changes which are to be taken care of notice. One important change is a goodwill. Now goodwill will not be eligible for depreciation, and this amendment has been proposed with effect from retrospectively current financial year. That is mean assessment year 21-22, financial year 2021. So even in current year, this goodwill not will be eligible for depreciation. This will continue to be considered as a capital asset like a land. When you have a capital asset like land, you are not eligible for depreciation. So will be the case of the goodwill. So what the section 32(1) is being amended, block of assets is being amended, but since this is being considered a capital asset, corresponding amendment is being made in section 48 and 55, that how to compute capital gain in case of a sale or transfer of a capital asset. Whenever you have acquired a capital asset by paying a money, only that will be considered to be as a cost of acquisition. In case you have developed the goodwill yourself without incurring any expenditure or self-generated goodwill, that will not be eligible for any set-off, etc. Whatever the amount you will receive on transfer of goodwill will be fully chargeable to tax at the normal rate of tax and with no concession on that part. So one need to be very careful on this part, that goodwill is. In case where goodwill in the past has been considered as a part of a block of assets, depreciation has been allowed. So where that value will get frozen and computation will be made accordingly under section 50, where depreciable asset becomes chargeable to tax. So this is a change which has been made, and this change has been made keeping in mind that this provision of goodwill was being exploited, keeping in particular in the case of a slum sale, where you are acquiring some unit or undertaking and you were paying a very higher price considering some value of the sum of the assets or land, building, etc. But the book value was low and difference was being treated as a goodwill, intangible asset as a goodwill, which makes you eligible for 25% rate of depreciation. To plug that anomaly, I believe this amendment has been brought in. And since Supreme Court has said goodwill is one of the intangible assets eligible for depreciation. Another change is regarding contribution of ESI, FPF, employee contribution. We all know when we pay salary to the employee, it is an eligible expenditure. But when I deduct something out of the employee's salary, maybe towards ESI or PF, that is employee's contribution, it is considered to be income of the employer under section 224. Now, but when I deposit that what I have deducted with the Provident Fund Authority or ESI authority, it is considered to be an eligible expenditure under section 3615A. That's a law which is there. But 3615A say it will be allowed as a deduction when you have made the payment before the due date under the relevant law. Now, if you have PF says 15th of the month is the date, or ESI says 18th of the month is the due date, then if you don't deposit it, it is not an eligible expenditure under 3615A. However, the court has taken a view when 43B was amended that the due date here will mean, and concessional treatment will be that in case you have deposited this amount before the due date of filing the return, then it will be eligible expenditure. Now this act is being amended and it is being clarified that such expenditure will not be eligible for exemption in case you have not made the payment before the due date. This means every month, every due date, you need to make the payment. Even a single day default in depositing ESI or PF will make that expenditure ineligible for expenditure for all times to come. This is, I believe, a very big, I will say, change which is being proposed, which is, I believe, will cause a lot of problems. The explanation given, justification given for bringing this amendment is that when you delay, when the employer deduct and does not deposit, it is a injustice to the employee. I do agree. But in case there is a few days delay and then the employer will never deposit, it will be a bigger injustice. It will be better that you allow deduction in the year in which it is paid. Since payment is also important, employee will get only when the employer deposited. In case employer doesn't deposit, employee will never get the amount. And in case of a delay, interest and penalty in any case will be taken care of by the ESI Act or the PF Act. So why we use Income Tax Act for just one of the, another law to impose an obligation on the employer and to deny the deduction? And this then will increase artificially the income of the employer. That is not a good cause, I believe. That's it. The third change is in section of in respect of a real estate developer, whereby I believe you will be knowing that in the mini budget in between, the finance minister in November has announced in order to get rid of the inventory with the real estate developer has having, and if they sell their residential units at a price which can be 20% variation with the circle rate, so then income will not be increased. We all know there is a section 43CA which mandate in the case of a real estate developer, etc., in the case of business, if you sell a real estate which is land and building at a value less than circle rate, then income shall be computed at the circle rate. Then earlier the Finance Act has amended giving concession up to 5%. Later on it was increased to 10%. But now in the month of November, it has said that now in the case of a residential unit, which is first time allotted by a developer to a person and the value of such flat or the apartment does not exceed 2 crore rupees, then the variation can be up to 20%. Now this finance bill has proposed that this variation can go up to 20% in case the residential unit has been sold between 12th November 2020 to 30th June 2021. So this concession is available of the residential unit sold during that period, value up to 2 crore rupees. So Act has been amended 43CA. Corresponding amendment has been made in section 56 to 10, where when you receive a property or you buy a property at a value less than circle rate, that is also considered to be income from other sources. So in case there is a variation of 20%, so that will not be considered to be your income. But this transaction need to happen between 12th November 20 to 30th June 2021, not beyond that. So these are the changes so far the business income and income from other sources are concerned. A few changes on the capital gain side, and one a noticeable change is what I told about ULIP, which will be considered a capital asset. Second is the goodwill, which I have talked about it. But there is one change which will be important is regarding the partnership. Under the present law, when a partner receives any amount from the partnership firm, it is exempt because firm has paid the taxes. But at a time of retirement or dissolution, when a partner is given some asset in lieu of the capital account or in addition to the capital account, there have been judgment which is considered it will not be chargeable tax. Now the law has been amended to provide that in case when you give a capital asset to a partner at the time when he is retiring or dissolution, then the value of that capital asset will be considered at a fair market value. And whatever is the value as per the books of account, what is the cost of acquisition, and the fair market value, that is the circle rate value, the difference will be treated as a capital gain in the hands of the firm. So then the firm need to pay tax because it will be considered that the firm has sold out this land and the firm will be required to pay tax on this. Similarly, when a partner receives any money over and above the amount standing in the capital account, the difference will also be considered to be an income of the firm and firm will be required to pay capital gain tax on the difference that we see. This will be two, these are two important changes which may affect the working of the firm and one need to be taken care of. And since firm status is of including LLP, so it will be equally applicable to an LLP also. So these are the changes which have been made. And now I may talk something which may be affecting the profession about the tax audit. We all know under 44AB tax audit is required to be carried. This provision was introduced way back in 84, where proposal was initially for 20 lakh, which was increased to 40 lakh. Then it was increased to 60 lakh, and then to 1 crore, and then to 5 crore rupees. Now, in the case of an organization which turnover is up to 5 crore rupees and it does not have a transaction in cash, otherwise than mainly by other guys, then audit is not required up to 5 crore rupees. Now, this threshold is being increased to 10 crore rupees. So all those tax audit which we have been carrying out, those organization entity where turnover or gross receipt or is up to rupees, says up to rupees 10 crore, they will not be required to get the account audited in case of this specified transaction being met. This may cause something with the profession, but I believe government thinks that when digital transactions are happening and payment are by and large are by account pay checks, etc., RTGS, etc., so they have enough trail and audit is not required. The challenge which I believe the government will have, compliance with the various other provisions, because now the Form 3CD, which a tax auditor is required to certify, is so comprehensive. It is not only related to the transaction carried out through check or RTGS. It is the nature of the transaction which is also important, and how do you take care and how do you report those transactions. I believe government is putting more reliance on 26AS and capturing of AIR information. That's why they are thinking that it is not required. Let's see to it how this experiment succeed on successful on that part. Now, having said so about this, there is a small change that presumptive model of taxation in case of profession will not be available to LLP. It will, the last it was said you can pay 50% of the seat, but this will not be available to LLP. This is a clarificatory amendment which has been made on that part on this issue. Some changes have been made in respect of the minimum return tax MAT 115 JB, which we talk about it. We know in 115 JB there is an exemption in respect of the income under Chapter 3. Earlier, dividend income was part of Chapter 3, exempt under Section 1034. A company or any person receiving dividend, it was exempt under Section 1034, which is under Chapter 3. And in 115 JB, it was stated while computing book profit, income which is a part under Chapter 3, other than capital gain, which was 1038, will not be considered for the purpose of book profit. It will be reduced. Now, from 1st April 20, dividend income has become chargeable to tax. Section 1034 has been diluted for that. Now, a company receiving a dividend income, it will be required to pay. It will be required to be included in the book profit. Now, foreign companies receive dividend now, and these dividends are chargeable to tax at a rate which may be less than the minimum alternate tax rate of 15%. Because under T3, India has with Hong Kong, the tax on dividend income is 5%. With UK, it is 10%. UAE, it is 10%. Singapore, it is 15%. These rates are less than the rate of the MAT. So if a foreign company receives dividend from India, say a company of Singapore or a company of UK has made investment in an Indian company, it is parent company and holding company is there, and the dividend it pays to the parent company, India will charge tax at the rate of 5% because of the treaty. But since the company or income of that foreign company under MAT will be higher with 15%. In order to remove this anomaly, 115 JB is being amended retrospectively from last year only, 1st April 20 only, clarifying that dividend income will be excluded while computing book profit. Similarly, expenditure incurred for earning dividend income will also be excluded in the case of a foreign company. So that's amendment. Similar is being made in respect of transfer pricing provision, where primary secondary adjustment is made, so that book profit get increased in the subsequent year. So now it is being said that in case the book profit is because of this secondary adjustment being made and added to that income, that will be reduced from the book profit and will not be considered for that part. Now this brings me to all, I believe, substantive provisions. Now I go to some filing of return, etc. Friend, we have seen now over a period the department is heading toward more digitized, more online filing, more computer utilization, faceless, etc. And time period is being reduced over a period. Now, this budget also proposes to reduce time period for filing filing of return, etc. Now, under Section 139(1), an ordinary person is required to file the return by 31st July. A person who is required to get the account audited or a company is required to file the return by 31st October. And in case of transfer pricing provision, it is 30th November. Partners who are required to get accounts audited of where firm are required to get account audited, they are also get tagged with this date, extended date. Now, a problem has come up, particularly in the case of Goa, where the local law mandate and the Income Tax Act recognizes that when a person who is a partner in a partnership firm and he receives a share under their local law, that share belongs to the both wife and husband, and it has to be divided both. If that be so, the extension under the law for filing due date of return from 31st July to 31st October is available only to the partner, not to the spouse. In order to remove that anomaly, it is being provided that the spouse date of filing the return will also get extended. That's a provision. Another problem which was coming up regarding the transfer pricing audit, which says due date of filing is 30th November. However, in case there is a domestic transaction which is being subject to transfer pricing audit, the partner of that firm which is required to get the audit, TP audit in respect of domestic transaction, the due date was not extended. Now that date is also being extended to 30th November, meaning thereby a partnership partner of a partnership firm which is required to get the audit done or a certificate obtained for the domestic transfer pricing, his due date will also be 30th November, not 31st October. That's an issue. Another law is now, as per the law, you know that if you miss the deadline of filing the return could have been filed earlier up to 2 years from the end of the assessment year. This period was reduced to 1 year, and last year it was reduced to the year before only up to the end of the assessment year. Now this budget proposes to reduce this period further by 3 months, meaning thereby now you can file the return if you have missed the deadline only up to 31st December. Now 2021 return you have already filed, 21-22 return for the assessment ended 21-22, the year ended 31st March 21. The due date will be 31st July, 31st October, and 30th November. If you miss the deadline, you can file the return only up to 31st December 2021. Thereafter, you will not be eligible to file the return beyond 31st December 2021 under section 139(4). With the result that penalty provision that if the return has been filed after 31st December will become redundant. Penalty will be only 5,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees up to November, and there will be no rate. Similarly, you will not be able to revise the return after 31st December. That period of up to the end of the assessment year is also being reduced by 3 months to 31st December. So your return revision will also get restricted, and you will get a period of 5 months in case your due date is 31st July. If it is 31st October, you will get a period of 2 months. And if you are at the TP provision and your due date of filing return is 30th November, you will be able to revise only within 1 month and not thereafter. Correspondingly, the notice which is to be served for scrutiny assessment under section 143(2), that period is also being reduced from 6 months to 3 months from the end of the financial year in which the return has been filed. And this will be applicable from 1st April 2021, with the result that return which we have filed now in the month of December, or which we are supposed to file by 15th February, where tax audit etc. are required. Since these returns have been filed by financial year 2021, the scrutiny notice can be issued in such cases only up to 30th June 2021 and not beyond thereafter. That's another amendment which has come up on that part. Another amendment which has been made on this part is that assessment which has to be completed shall now be completed within a period of 9 months from the end of the financial year of assessment year. However, this 9-month period applicability will be applicable in respect of assessment year 21-22. For assessment year 2021, period of that up to the end of the year, that will continue to be applicable. But for the period for this one to 21-22, it will be 9 months. So now take a case, the return which you have filed now, that scrutiny has to be completed up to 31st March 2022. The return which you will file of from 1st April 21-22, that which return will be go, that has to be completed by 31st December 22. Now this will be a big change and it will be under pressure. The government says that with the faceless assessment, we will be in a position to issue notice, scrutiny it very quickly. A good move, I believe. These are the changes. Then coming to the in search cases, survey cases, and income escaping assessment under section 147, 148. All are being revamped. Now, in notice for reassessment, income escaping assessment can be given up to a period of 6 years under the present law. Now, this is being reduced to 3 years and split it into 2 parts. Where there is an allegation of income escaping assessment is less than 50 lakh rupees, then the period will get restricted to 3 years from the end of the relevant assessment. So it will be 3+1. However, where the allegation is more than 50 lakh rupees income escaping assessment, then this period will get extended to 10 years. That's it. That's another change which is coming up on permanent. Now, similarly for search and seizure cases also, the existing provision of 153A and 153C is being abolished. This will be applicable in respect of search on or after from 1st April 2021. So in respect of those searches which are carried out during this financial year and earlier year, the existing provision of assessment under section 153A of 1+6 or 1+10 will continue. But for search carried out after 1st April 2021, the new provision of 3-year or 10-year will be applicable. But in those cases, as against income escaping assessment, where assessing officer will first issue a notice when after calling for information and then pass an order making that your income has escaped assessment and make a reassessment after issue of notice. In the present case, in the search and seizure case, the 3 assessment year will get automatically reopened. So in one way, it is a welcome move, that period getting reduced from 6 to 3 years. But there is another chance that in case the income escaping assessment or the material found indicate that income was more than 50 lakh rupees and it is represented in the form of an asset, then the period will get extended to 10 years. So this will again be an issue, major issue, how this will be carried out. But this is a major change on the issue. Friend, looking to the time constraint, I believe it is 7:30. I need to just rush through 2-3 provisions which I will left out, and then leaving you to ask in case the time permit for a question. I believe if you, I don't know, Mr. Murli and Mr. Jain is here. You can put to people who have any question and time permitting on the chat box so that you can take it up and then. Another change is regarding some TDS provision which have been made on TDS side. Dividend income is one where 194 presently TDS is to be deducted in case the payment is more than 5,000 rupees. This exemption is being extended in respect of the payment to be made to some trust, which we call a business trust or investment trust. Those trusts, if you made the payment, then TDS need not be deducted because the income is exempt otherwise. So that's the one change which is. 2 new provisions are being introduced in the TDS. One is 194P and 194Q. 194P is for the senior citizen of the age of 75 years or more during the previous year. In those cases who are receiving pension and who have only income from interest from that bank account only where they are receiving pension. Now in those cases, the return is not required to be filed by such senior citizen. In those cases, the bank who is receiving the pension, the bank where this person is having the bank account will deduct tax at source both on the interest income which is accruing or arising to such person and the pension which he is getting from that, and file and pay deduct tax, and that will be all. So that bank will carry out the obligation of the senior citizen by way of deducting the tax and filing the TDS return and not the income tax return, and senior citizen will not be required to file the return. I am pleased to share with this that this is a big relief to the senior citizen, because people who are above 75 years of age, it is very difficult for them to access and to get the return filed, particularly those who are receiving such pension like this, maybe armed personnel, maybe government employee, maybe other employees, only because they receive pension in their account and they have only one bank account where they deal with. It will give independence to them. It will ease their life, make their life easier. And this was the suggestion I may share with you sent by our past president, Mr. T.N. Manoharan only. And it was only on his recommendation that the government has accepted the suggestion as introduced this provision of 194P, making the life of the senior citizen easier. We look forward that such suggestions are continued to accepted in the past, and this may be scope may get expanded in the years to come, where pension, interest, income, or other area will also get covered. Another provision is 194Q. Last year, we had a provision which was introduced, TCS, making it obligatory under section 206C1H that a person who is making sales to collect TCS, in case the person who is making the sale is turnover or gross receipt was more than 10 crore rupees in the preceding year, and the amount being received is 50 lakh or more during the year. So there was an obligation while you make sale not to only collect the amount of the sale or the GST, but in addition thereto as 0.1% of the TCS. Now a corresponding provision is being introduced for TDS to be collected by the person who is making purchases. Now, when you make purchase, you may have to make the payment to the seller. So while making payment to the seller, you will deduct TDS at the rate of 0.1%, and the conditions are same. The person purchaser turnover is more than 10 crore rupees in the preceding year, and the sale you have made to the person is 50 lakh or more during the year. So, and this obligation is not on cash based, meaning or cash system. It will be on the accrual basis or cash basis, whichever earlier. So you need to deduct TDS and deposit when you credit or when you receive or advance, etc., payable, etc. Since this provision is being introduced 194Q, and in case you are required to deduct TDS under this clause, then obviously the TCS provision will not be applicable, because 206C1H clearly says that TDS, where TDS is deductible, then this clause will not be applicable. So obviously TCS provision will get diluted, but TDS provision will become applicable. But frankly, I am concerned with these two amendments because these are increasing the compliance burden on the business too much. For on every purchase, etc., to deduct TDS 0.1%, it will not only affect the fund flow, it will also pose a challenge on this issue. So that is with the result, there may be many trade where the margin may not itself be 0.1%. In the wholesale trade, 0.1%, but when you are when you are purchasing and then you are required to do this type of working, I believe this will increase pressure on the industry, on the businesses, and compliance, as also fund flow crisis it may create also. But I'm still worried about how this provision will get implemented and practically how far it will be justifiable to deduct and to collect taxes, etc. I may just mention, not to just to criticize, but to analyze. We have been receiving tweet after tweet, years after year, where the CBDT is taking pride that we have issued so much crore refund and 4 lakh crore, saying 1 crore refund has been issued of 1,70,000 crore rupees, 1,70 crore rupees. I just wonder, is it a good news or something to have an introspection? I'm of the view, in case more people are claiming refund, there is something challenged, and these challenges can be three ways. One, the system of collecting tax is need introspection. We are deducting more taxes, more than the amount due from the gentleman or from the taxpayer. We need to carry out a statistical research analysis, because all returns are there, whether the tax in which sector we are finding the TDS or TCS rate is higher than the tax which a person is required to pay, and why don't we amend that provision? Secondly, is our enforcement mechanism is so stringent that we are making addition in the hands of the people taxpayer and collecting taxes by creating a demand, which later on these demand or these addition get deleted, with the result the taxpayer become entitled to the refund and that tax is required to be refunded. I'm wondering why it can happen in these two circumstances. Why it is happening so? I don't find that any taxpayer will pay more taxes for the sake of simplicity to get refund and interest. It is under compulsion, either TDS or TCS or by compulsion or a forceful recovery. We need to have an introspection on this issue. This is, I believe, is probably we need to have a working done on this issue. Why do refund be there? Now with this TDS and TCS provision, I believe in each and every case, in many cases, you will find the refund amount going up. And how many cases people can obtain a lower deduction certificate in 187? If that be so, we are increasing the burden therein. We are making again an assessment at a time of issue of a lower TDS, because then you have to compute income, determine the amount, possible tax. That's a challenge which I believe one need to be. Friend, there are certain other changes on TDS. One is regarding where the tax rate will go up in case when you are deducting TDS of a person and you file, that gentleman is not filing the tax return for the last 2 years, the rate of TDS or TCS will be double the rate at which you have been deducting the tax. Only one exemption condition is that the TDS or TCS deducted is 50,000 rupees more of such person. Now you will ask a question, how do I know whether the person of whom I am supposed to deduct TDS, whether he has filed the return or not? For that, the department says, like in the case of a bank, which is now required to collect TCS while making cash withdrawal, in case of a non-filer of return beyond 20 lakh rupees, there is a utility available by the department. If you put a PAN number, you can on the utility verify whether this PAN number the person has filed the return for the last 2 years or not. In case he has not filed the return for that, then you will be required to deduct TDS or TCS at double the rate. With the result, now every organization will need to work a software and develop a software and to make sure that a TDS is collected at the appropriate rate. Later on, in case the department, which the TDS department will easily be able to do with their software, that you were supposed to deduct TDS of this person, which you have deducted, but the rate has to be double since that person has not filed the return for the last 2 years. So then you can be in trouble that there can be a default on TDS. This will put an extra obligation on the person present. Now, there are few changes. Settlement Commission has been abolished from 1st February 2021. So no person can go to settlement. All application pending will be transferred to the interim board, which is being constituted. Those applications will be dealt according to the existing provision of Settlement Commission, but no new application can come up. In place thereof, a new dispute resolution committee is being constituted, but the threshold limit for going to DRC is very limited. Income return should be 50 lakh or less, and dispute should be restricted to only 10 lakh rupees. And in case the dispute is more than 10 lakh, then that cannot be done. So that's another area which has been worked out, and which is the area I think may need a reconsideration, because one, we have a Vivad Se Vishwas scheme where we want to reduce litigation. Another, we want to abolish Settlement Commission. We are constituting a new forum. Welcome move, no issue, but we're restricting the people who can approach that DRC. I am of the view that dispute, whether it is 10 lakh or 10 crore rupees, if it can be settled, these will be much better, because it will be at the ultimately the commission, that committee will decide. And in case somebody had made a mistake which need higher penalty or prosecution, that committee can always deny. So was the case with the Settlement Commission. But I believe to reduce litigation, it is very important that that a DRC power should be unlimited, not restricted to 50 lakh rupees income and dispute of 10 lakh rupees. Because they can resolve and they can refuse, yes, this is not a fit case for resolution, or they can say no concession. Interest, penalty, prosecution, all will happen because your default is serious. That can always happen, I believe. That's the idea which I believe. Similarly, authority for advance ruling is being abolished. In place thereof, board for advance, authority for advance ruling is being constituted, which will have the which will give a opinion, but that opinion will be subject to appeal both by the assessing officer as well as the taxpayer. So you can make an application for getting an opinion, and in case you are not satisfied, you can make an appeal to the High Court. That's power. Similarly, in case the AO is not satisfied, he can go to the High Court with that opinion. That's the issue. Another change is regarding the fake invoice. We all know a penalty has been stated of equivalent to the amount of the fake invoice was introduced last year. Now, in order to ensure recovery, Section 281 is being amended to provide that in such cases, attachment can be done where penalty is likely to be imposed under Section 271, this provision, etc. Friend, with this, I will just wind up my deliberations, because there are these are various changes. There are some other minor changes, particularly on the respect of, I will say, international taxation, about the sovereign wealth fund, pension fund, etc., or about the GIFT City, etc., International Financial Services Center. I have not touched upon, but in case you have any question or issues, I will love to answer those questions, subject to time availability and the organizers' capability or working on this issue availability. Thank you, friends. May I request now Mr. Jain, Chairman, and the Secretary to come back, and in case they have any question or any other issue, I can be there.
Yes, sir. There are some questions. I'll just flash it on the screen, sir. Just give me a moment, sir. Just 1 second, sir. Give me a moment. I'll just copy 1 or 2 questions and then put it on the screen. So you're able to see the screen, sir?
Yes, I can see the screen now.
Yes, sir. First question is...
you will read out or what do you do?
Sir, whichever way you are comfortable, sir.
I will go with you because you read out, that will be better, I believe.
Okay, I will read, sir. Whether the ceiling of 2.5 lakhs for PF contribution is per month or per annum?
It's per month. It's per month. You can go at per month. It is a employee contribution only.
So the next question also gets answered. CA Narayanan, who wants, what about contribution by employers? So it is only employees contribution actually. Next is, please clarify the provisions of disallowance of employees contribution applicability for assessment year from the effective date of applicability. I think you told it is 1 from 2021, sir. Am I right, sir?
Wait, contribution made in respect of PF, it is 1st April 2021. And in respect of ULIP policy issued, subscribe up any policy issued after 1st February 2021.
Okay. Next is CA Balagopalan. In case of trust, will expenditure made out of income up to 15% freely accumulated also result in reduction of eligible expenditure?
I could not get what you want to answer. I am not able to get what is
case of trust will expenditure
made of income to 50 free account also result in reduction of eligible expenditure. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's a year to year. In case in the year you have 100 rupees income and you have spent 86 rupees and 14 rupees your balance, that is with you. Nothing to be done. It is only corpus.
Yeah. Next is by CA Dandapani Vivekanandan. Whether presumptive tax will be applicable up to 10 crores if cash transactions are less than 5%.
No, presumptive has a separate model. I believe presumptive is not working on this issue. Presumptive is separate. Presumptive has nothing to do with the cash model. I believe there are thresholds. There's 1 crore, 2 crore. There's a different threshold. Presumptive is applicable up to 2 rupees, 2 crore. That's what the issue which we were working on. That's a separate issue.
Correct, sir. So beyond 2 crores, 44AD cease to exist, and then you have to follow 44AB only.
Only.
Sir, these 2 questions I have taken from the previous sessions, not today's session, but I would like you to answer this. Is there a possibility of declaring interest on
I hope I'm not sitting in a CA exam. Carry on. Is there a possibility of declaring interest on bank deposit of various other bank to the bank? I believe this is a good idea, but I believe this is an experiment which the government has done on the recommendation of our honorable past president. I believe down the line this can also be considered. I'm of the view, frankly.
Okay. Next is, what will happen to interest on post office deposits in case of specified senior citizens, whether they need to file IT returns?
No, see, law as on date is very clear that it has to be a bank account where you are having a pension fund or where you're receiving the pension. And you are having that bank account interest from that bank account, and you do not have any other income or other bank account. So it has to be strictly followed. I say it is an experiment stage because department will not like to lose the number of returns. Idea is to give a relief to the senior citizen. So they will say, yes, in case you want to fall in, please follow, and you go to one bank, wind up all your accounts at other bank, wherever you are receiving pension, keep that account, and then you will get benefit.
Next is by CA Dandapani Vivekanandan. For senior citizens more than 75 years of age, whether interest income from savings bank account will be subject to TDS? If so, under which account? If they want to file return, can they be allowed to file? Can assessee file Form 15G for non-deduction of interest?
Yes. See, this is decision. I believe this is not aware. The law is very clear. But if you fulfill the condition, then you have to say to the bank and you have to make a declaration also. In case you don't make a declaration, you don't fulfill the condition, then you are free to file 15G and you take the onus upon yourself. It is not that way. It will become mandatory that you have to do that way only. It is an enabling provision to the bank. 194P is an enabling provision for the bank that in case a senior citizen has income from pension, he has a bank account and he make a declaration there to the bank that this is my bank account and pension, and then bank will carry out the obligation under section 194P, and that's all.
Yeah, I'll take few more questions, sir, which I'll not be there on the screen. Sir, any impact on non-residents if they are receiving pension income from a foreign country?
Yes, that provision I didn't touch upon. There is a section 89A which has been introduced now. We all know it. There is a section 89 which deal with the areas of salary. In case an employee receives a salary which is in areas of the salary of earlier year, then he can recompute the tax liability of the earlier year by spreading that area in the earlier year, and the rebate which happened in that year can be taken in this year. Similar provision has been introduced in section 89A, where a person who was a non-resident Indian in earlier years and was a resident of that country, and he has contributed to the retirement fund, and now he has come back to India, and in view of that fact that because under the law of that country, whatever he receives from retirement fund is chargeable to tax on receipt basis when he withdraws. But in India, on accrual basis, it gets taxed on that basis. Then he will be eligible to take the benefit like 89 under section 89A under the prescribed rule. So what we'll have is that the government will say that in case you pay the tax now, and as and when that country will deduct a tax at that source, we will give a credit of that tax is paid to you. That's the benefit. So it will be whatever mismatch which happen between the year when it get taxed in the foreign country and the year in which it get taxed in India. So that credit will be allowed.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions, Vijay sir. In fact, I took few questions from the previous session also so that our members will stand to gain with your availability. So thank you so much, Vijay sir, for your excellent presentation.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
So looking forward to someday invite you to Chennai and then to Madurai as well, sir. So
thank you. Thank you. It will be a pleasure. Wish you all the best, and to all my dear friends and colleagues, brothers and sisters in southern India and other parts which are watching this program, heartiest compliments to all of you. And I'm really happy to see all of you in such large number in this program. And I had a deliberation with you. I will love to be with you among physically one day. Let this COVID-19 go, and we will back in the full form to be amongst you. Thank you, friends.
Yeah, thank you all of you. And sir, we'll be putting this recording in the YouTube later for more people to benefit out of this program.
All right, that will be good. May I exit now?
Yeah, yes, sir. Friends, thank you all of you. Thanks for joining. And tomorrow we have Metro Conference. It is on 4th, 5th, and 6th. Very interesting topics are lined up on GST, technology, and income tax. I request all of you to register for the program after visiting the SARC website. Thank you all of you. Stay connected and be safe at all times. Thank you.